Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us in this March 2024 webinar, jointly organized by the IU ASEAN Global Gateway Office and also by the School of Education. This webinar is part of a monthly series whereby we bring international scholars and IU scholars together in conversation. And today, we are most honored to have joining us Dr. Ethan Trinh from Georgia State University via Vietnam. This webinar will focus on Dr. Trin's research on identities in liminal spaces through critical storytelling. Multilingual immigrants and queer scholars and educators inform their research. Dr. Trinh is the Associate Director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center at Georgia State University. I am Faridah Pawan, the IU ASEAN Global Gateway Academic Director and Professor in the School of Education. For your information, the webinar will take the form of a 30-minute conversation between Dr. Trinh and myself. We will then proceed to a 20 or 30-minute question and answer period. In the meantime, audience members, please post your questions in the Q&A panel anytime. At the end of 30 minutes, we'll pull those questions and we'll have Dr. Trinh respond to the questions. Dr. Trinh, I hope from this point onwards, we can use your first name with your permission. Ethan. Welcome to our community and to our conversation. And so, Dr. Trinh, Ethan, I'm going to start with a question as a means for your introduction. Your academic writing distinguishes itself as always reaching the head and the heart, and it's always very personal. You always start with your writing and your work with a verse or a dedication. Would you like to start with one now as we begin?
Sure. But before I started, thank you so much for inviting me to this space and to the community. So I guess, let's start with Quê Hương, because it's kind of like the theme and the title of the conversation today. So I would love to read a verse from my book chapter Quê Hương, if that's okay. Quê Hương, written by Vietnamese poet Đỗ Trung Quấn, and the melancholy, the loneliness, and the fatigue control my body and make it difficult for my finger to type on the keyboard. The fabrics of liminal space in this, in the space, in the country, freeze my soul and body. I cannot move anywhere else beyond this space. However, listening to Quê Hương heals the dryness of my soul, watering it for recovery. Quê hương, mỗi người chỉ một, như là chỉ một mẹ thôi. Quê hương nếu ai không nhớ, sẽ không lớn nổi thành người. Quê hương everyone has only one. It's like you only have one mother. Quê hương, if you don't remember, you won't grow up as a human being. And I admit that my weakness in translating Vietnamese into English. I spent time finding a good translation for each word. I spent time thinking whether my translation successfully described what the author truly meant. I hesitated in the translation in my own language. I think I failed in the translation. I did not want to give an English version at first, but the readers, specifically Vietnamese American, will appreciate the raw attempt because it could help them trace lost identity of language and history. In addition, translating is a political act. It is just not the linguistic translation. Instead, it is an expression of our soul, memories, culture, and politics into each word. Translating is not a skill. It is a wholeness of identity of one's life. Therefore, I would not italicize the word Quê Hương or any Vietnamese words because it is my claim as an act of resistance against the Western academic writing style that I'm trying to publish in.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for starting us into this walk with you through, the multiple experiences that you have, your identities. There was a Q&A posting just now from Tim who said, just wanted to say how much I appreciate Dr. Trinh, and as we begin. And so Quê Hương is the focus is the focus of this webinar, but we will also engage in Quê Hương in many forms, in
Yes.
intersections with identities. And so in that regard, in your article, Dr. Trinh, Ethan, in the article Still You Resist, you talk about intersectionality as a way of understanding and analyzing the complexities in the world, in the people, in our identities. And you yourself said that you use intersectionality and the space as a means of looking into the complexities of your identities. And so if you could, can you engage us in understanding, in walking through the intersections of your identities and its complexities?
Yes, thank you so much for the questions. And I think it is interesting when we talk about the intersection of identity, right? So we have to draw from Crenshaw concept about, one person has a different identity, but it's intersecting with each other. And the way that I understand, and to be honest with you, I will not be able to fully understand, somebody's identity, especially, with the richness and complexity of the identity. But I think it is interesting, and it is where the liminal space allows me to come in and then get into the understand the complexity of it. I would love to share with you an example, because when you share that quote that is actually coming from took me back when I taught adult ESOL student at a college level. And at that time, I was very proud of my identity, and especially with the queer identity, right? And then but way back then, the people have not started to talk about like the pronoun or anything. But I myself came to the class, and I talked to the student. I share with the student my pronouns that they, them. Um, and the student started to talk about like, oh, what does that mean? So, and then I say, oh, so that is what it means, but I just want to make sure that we understand, and at least, from my perspective, they, them, there, the pronoun reflects my non-binary ideology in terms of the way that I view the word. It's not only like framed or boxed in the way of the gender identity, but it goes beyond more like ideological perspective in terms of like onto-epistemology, right? And I think, because we are limited in the word, in the language, in the linguistics, and then I think the gender pronoun, they them give me the platform to share with my student, hey, this is one of the way to, describe somebody who gets stuck in between of, male and female, right? But it also give me the platform to understand and to view the word differently. So that is why I brought, the gender pronoun into the classroom, and I started to talk with the student in that way, to get them, that is something interesting, right? But also through the way that, like the queer pedagogy, and then, the knowledge that I brought into the classroom, the student who come from the different backgrounds starting to question, right? And that's to start asking the question. That's the cool thing about teaching, right? You come to the classroom and then you feel like, oh, today we're gonna teach about grammar, right? Or we're gonna teach about writing and speaking, but you have, a fixed textbook, right? So the way that I bring into the pedagogy, into decolonizing the curriculum, is to give them the different perspective, the different representation that is being excluded and overlooked and ignored in the classroom. So I think the way that I bring myself, my queer identity, my Vietnamese queer immigrant identity into the classroom to talk with the student, help them view the community and connect with their intersectional identities as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I mean, the intersections, I mean, to unravel them layer by layer will take, us in a constant communication. It's not one conversation, but multiple. So in that regard, tying it what you just said to Wei Hung, which is a complexity in and of itself. And I'm an international myself, and I read it with so much interest because we are living in these in between spaces, and so. You mentioned in the Quê Hương article on critical storytelling and multilingual immigrants, um, the identities that we have as multilingual immigrants, as the life journeys and the liminal spaces which we inhabit, leads us to a yearning of Wei Hung. And I would say, just based on what you say, our identities also lead us to Wei Hung. And so in that article, you said Wei Hung, I love the way you unravel this, is out of reach. Wei Hung is fragments of cultural values. Wei Hung is a lost dream. Wei Hung is a rebellion against assimilation. Wei Hung is relational. Can you meditatively walk, a concept that you use in your writing, the in-between spaces, not getting here or there, but the in-between, reflecting on the in-between spaces. Can you walk us through the Wei Hung in this present moment for you?
Sure. When you talk about meditatively walking, I think the first thing that we should think about is the breathing, right? And when I got the question, I feel like I need to take a moment to breathe, right? And we forgot to breathe in every single day. We're just so busy. We wake up, we get coffee, and then we go to work, right? But I think that is kind of like how meditation helps me to like, hey, pause, breathe, get a deep breathing, and then kind of like see what is going on with myself, my body, my mind, and trying to get into deeper into like, okay, so today what I'm gonna do is do this and that and that. Now, when you talk about Wei Hu, I'm at this current moment, I'm thinking about coffee, right? So this called Vietnamese coffee, we call it cafe soda, right? So cafe soda is just one of the very popular way to get people into, Wei Hu, my Wei Hu. And then I need to get it thirsty. You know, and then when you get a sip of the cafe soda, you will be able to see that the water and the ice come into your body and you feel it. You feel like, your Vietnamese culture is in you, get through your vein and body and blood. And it will not escape from your body in your queer identity and Vietnamese-ness, you know. But also I'm wearing áo dài today, right? So áo dài is kind of like a traditional Vietnamese clothes, and I'm wearing it with pride, and answering the questions that you have, the current moment, right? Even though my Wei Hương is out of reach, in distance physically, but I bring my Wei Hương into this current moment, into this space, not only with myself, but with you, so that you know a little bit of the fragment of the cultural values that raise me, that nurture me, that feed me, that give me thinking, the writing, the language, and the way that I would be able to expose myself and expose and explore myself, right? And I think that is just part of like the way of the intersectional identity just get into me. The coffee, the clothes, and all of, the upbringing experience that my mom and my dad actually cultivate and feed me and put into me. It is just, I am them, and they are in me. So that is kind of the way to share with you that, Wei Wu is not only, it's just no longer kind of like the term or the phrase, but it just represents, the cultural value. And that is where we talk about the relationality, right? And especially from the Buddhist perspective, that the generation and generation exists and reform in the different ways. And I am the representation of my parents, my ancestor, my people who actually in Vietnam, but also like here in the US.
Well, actually, that's a good segue to a question. As an international myself, I feel that I belong to at least two countries, maybe more. And I'm sure you do too. So in a sense, when we talk about Wei Hung in the way that you have described, we both have lived in the United States. We both have lived in other countries as well. What's the difference for you between Wei Hung in Vietnam and Wei Hung in the United States?
I definitely miss, all of the moments when I grow up there, and then if you read the piece, and I'm pretty sure that the piece is very accessible. That is my purpose, for the readership. Not trying to like get into so much theory, but trying to like find a way to get, to make the piece accessible to people. And I definitely, use the very simple on the daily basics materials that I still remember, like so, like kind of like the bamboo boat, right? Or like my grandma's song, right? Or some sort of like the memory that I still have in the rice field. So those are kind of the moments that get stuck in my head. And I'm just talking to myself like, if I would be able to reuse those kind of like the daily life materials and the memories, and I would be able to build a bridge for people to come to understand my way home, right? And then, because the bridge, we just have to like, cross over, right? And I would be able to build a bridge to come to understand the way home or the country or or however that way who would look like to them. So I create a bridge for that so that we can come to meet in between, or we can come in and see each other's perspective. Now, the difference between Wei Hương there and here, I get here in this space, I would be able to feel that, I could do the work that I want to do. I could do the work that I feel like some sort of like the restriction and liminality, in the different space won't allow me or won't give me the opportunity to do that. So here, I just feel like the space liberate myself and my body and my queerness just help me a lot in terms of thinking, writing, and doing.
Very interesting. It's sort of interesting when we go back and forth because we find different aspects of ourselves in each of the spaces and celebrate and limit and think about them as we move back and forth. I think that's the space that we as internationals and we of multiple identities are able to enjoy. One of the things also that you mentioned here is that in your allyship article, I'm going to move to that one.
Sure.
I think to one of your identities, we've talked about your Wei Hung identity in terms of being a scholar, an immigrant, and a queer scholar, and a person. In that allyship article, one of the things that you described as queerness and queer thinking. You brought up something which is very interesting. You brought up, the identity, the word queer and queer thinking as not just a matter of identity, it's also a matter of action. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So that is part of my work. And I'm very proud of that, actually. Doing this kind of work give me a different ways of thinking and viewing the world. So back in the back in back into the history, when people say, "Oh, you're queer," right? That's kind of like a different way to say, "Oh, you're a faggot," right? Or like some sort of like in Vietnam, there's a term we call "bede," right? So that is kind of like the bede is just like drawing from, the French colonial term that's kind of describe the person half and half. They do not belong to male or female. And I think that is where we come back to kind of like the queerness and queer and how we would be able to like transform the way that people view it as kind of like something negative to transform it into the way of understanding and doing and writing and thinking differently. And is this kind of like the way to disrupt the binarism? It's the way to disrupt the fixity of understanding and viewing the world. So I think when we understanding the term queerness, right, it is no longer situated in the coded term LGBTQ, but it goes beyond than that. It thinking about the binary, non-binarism, right? It thinking and it questions about what is fixed there and what we can do to unfix the understanding and the mindset. For example, people say queerness, and in some part of the world, and especially, in my country back then, people, and there's a research about it, right? There's a research that people still think that queerness or like being LGBTQ is a disease, right? However, recently, probably in 2022 or 23, I don't remember, but the government claim that being LGBTQ or part of the community is not a disease anymore, and that you don't have it's just like moving beyond and open the door for people to see and do the research. And I think that is kind of like the way to help me understand and get into the queer community in Vietnam, um, with an open heart and then with the joy, queer joy, because now I would be able to get into that and understand, the complexity of the intersectional identity, right? Especially with, non-binary and gender people in Vietnam. So with all of the example that I give you, you would be able to see that queerness and queer thinking or thinking queer, that means, and then you would be able to see that in some of my paper. When I say thinking queer, that means that you have to kind of like put the fixity into questioning. You have to put the fixity into the way of challenging it, right? And then put that into the new use of understanding and acting in a different context. Because the work that I am doing, I'm not trying to like globalize it, because queerness is always situated and partially, in every single context. So I think that is part of the thinking queer comes out, because it's just based on every single context and based on, a single population that you are working with, you would be able to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the different layers of their identities.
Now, this is amazing that you've brought this up. One of the things also, this is a scholarly endeavor that is close to your heart. I can definitely see this, and I think we are sensing this scholarship that you are fronting for us. I'm going somewhat deeper into this, and I think this is all based on your work. And one of the things that you cite Ansel Dua quite a bit, and they describe the state of in-betweenness and the pain of personal growth as a consequence of being in this space. They mention the use of the qualique state, a state, a phase of your journey, a process that helps a person to confront struggles, darkness, and pain in their souls. Now, in your article, you mentioned that the qualique state is hellish, but you describe it as also a new home space for queer immigrants, scholars, and people of color. Can you then talk a little bit more or help us understand this juxtaposition of being in this hellish space and also a homey space, a home-y space, I should say.
So I just have to give you a little, a little context about that. So Qualique stage is one of the 7 stages of something called conocimiento by Gloria Anzaldúa. And uh, and in this stage of conocimiento, Gloria Anzaldúa walk us through, the different stages of, coming in, the beginning, and then get stuck in the in-between, which we call Nepanla, and then another stage of Qualique state, right? And then, in the 4 different stages. And I think it's just very interesting, Faridah, I have to tell you. I remember that every time that I go into the space of Anzaldúa work, I'm the only Vietnamese person there. And then I think that is the kind of like the way that, if I don't identify as what is that? Chicana feminist, am I allowed to come to the space? Right. But I think that is kind of the way to open and allow me to come to the space because of who I am and because of my intersectional identity. Gloria Anzaldúa work inviting me in and build a bridge for me to see, the way home, right? So coming back to the question that you asked me about the juxtaposition of the hellish phase, right? And, the homemade phase. Coming back to that, I just want to share with you in that piece when I was walking meditatively, right? I walked through all of my, I walked through the different phases of my understanding about my queerness, my intersectional identity. And back then, and if you have not heard about, the injustice of Vietnamese, especially Southeast Asian queer bodies in the white gay words. Take a look at that. When you get deeper into the history, when you get deeper into the scholarship and the narrative of those people, you would be able to see that there is a hatred that you would be able to see the injustice and the competition, among the queer South Asia versus with each other. And I think, Qualique stays give me the space and time to come and understand myself first and foremost, to understand my positionality, to understand the struggle that I have. And then, in the moment, and that is where I think it's interesting because the Chicana feminism and theory in Qualique state opened the space for me, right? And when I'm in the between space, I would be able to use the Vietnamese Buddhism to meditate in the space, in the held space, right? And I see the bridge. I see where it can give me a safe space to be myself. I meditate on that. And then after I meditated, I would be able to say, it is, why won't I be able to use my queer identity into the teaching, into practice, into working with students, into writing the piece, right? And I see the light in it and I feel comfortable with it, because when you would be able to explore yourself and understand a pieces of yourself, you would be able to feel comfortable and feel courage and use the vulnerability as the strength for yourself to build a bridge with other people, right? And it's just part of my work as well. I connect people, not only through the scholarship, but through the way that I respect the emotion, I respect the feeling, I respect the space. For example, when we are in today, I respect the people that, we are talking. And I think that is when the respect is a mutual feeling, then, the conversation start coming out and I say, I would love to know more about you. So, and then I always, share with my advisee or, some of like the scholar, for example, the TESOL International Conference last week, and then people reach out to me and they say, Ethan, can I come and talk to you? Sure. So when they talk to me and then they say, oh, I have this project, that project, this, that. But how can I start? And I responded to them, I say, if you don't come to understand yourself, how would you be able to do the work? So I think it's just very, and then, exploring self is never come into the final ending product, but it's always in the making. It's always in the way that in every single different context, you would be able to see yourself differently. And then you would be able to make a relational connection with the person that you're talking with the space, with the time, and every single different thing. So I will give that thought for the different conversation and discussion, but that's just a little bit of the question that you asked me.
And you've given us so much in that just brief statement that you had. I love the what you said. Exploring oneself never leads to an end product, but it's always in the making of all that you do. That's I'm going to quote you many times on that one. It's a very poignant statement. And so we're at the 30-minute point in the discussion, and I see several questions already from the audience. And so I'm just going to take them as they come, which is, what would you say is this is from Esther. What would you say is the most influential, are the most influential factors in your life that have helped and hindered your identity formation?
Not also help, but also hinder. I think, I guess it's, come back to self, when you started to recognize that you are queer as hell, like people say that being queer is just a crazy thing, right? Or like you are not allowed to be queer, to put it that way, or no, being bede, and then I'm using the Vietnamese word. Being bede is just bad, and being bede is just a disease. You need to get treatment for that. And it is the way for me to just break my heart. When I grow up and when I was in Vietnam, I grow up and I keep hearing those kind of things, right? And when you keep listening to it, and it just becomes something that gets stuck in your heart, in your mind, and you say, no, it is just wrongful to be queer, to be bede. But now I just feel like, well, being queer and being Vietnamese and being immigrant, I think it is a privilege, because I would be able to see the world differently. I would be to explore the Vietnamese-ness. I would be able to explore the queerness. I would be able to see, the Bay concept is being fragile. And I would be able to transform that into something positive, into something that it could help me to reimagine the world with the inclusivity and equity and accessibility, and especially with love, And I always talk to my student and advising, if you don't really love yourself, and it is not about a narcissistic way of viewing loving yourself, but because you are being oppressed with so many different layers, right? And when you do the work, when you expose your vulnerability, just too much in a stage of burning out. And I'm just saying that if you do not learn how to love yourself, if you do not learn how to say no to some opportunity, if you do not learn how to walk, take a break and breathe and, walk in the nature with yourself. If you do not love yourself that way, who's gonna love it? Who's gonna continue the work that you are doing? So it's just in those kind of liminal space, you come to understand your body. You come to understand that your body is also kind of like, the way to show the resistance against some sort of like the disease and institutional requirement that put onto your body, and then ask you to keep producing and producing, if it makes sense. So
Wonderful. Yeah, I think, when you say all those things, you have created spaces for us as well, and so thank you for that. I think what you just said also resonates with Michelle. And Michelle, I'm not going to pronounce your Vietnamese name because I'll mess it up. So, but thank you for sharing. I'm going to read Michelle Tran's comment, which is, it is great that Ethan, you are saying that Vietnam is getting more progressive. I can see that, especially in my generation, Gen Z, when I went back to Vietnam last summer. My partner showed me people like Huong Giang on
okay.
TV, and I realized that transgender representation in Vietnam is amazing. Although I am glad Vietnamese LGBTQ plus members are not deemed as ill or evil, the aftertastes of those comments are still seeped into the minds of the older generations, which I had firsthand experience in. And so in many ways, it's celebrating and lamenting that more work needs to be done. And so
Okay.
thank you, Michelle, for that comment. Ethan,
Thank
do you
you.
want to say in response anything to that?
Thank you, Michelle, for coming in. And I could feel the energy of allyship right there. You know, um, the way that we come to the space, we share the moments of thinking and energy. To myself, to Faridah, to Celia, and then bring peoples to kind of like understand what is going on in Vietnam. I think that is kind of the moment of showing allyship. You know, and um, that is why when I share with Faridah today that the work that I'm doing and we are doing will never come to an end, but it's just always in the making and in the process. And it should be based on the foundation of love and critical love, because if we do not do the work to build a space of togetherness, who's going to do the work?
Mhm.
So I just want to say thank you for the comment and for the support and encouragement from you. So thank you so much for that.
Mhm. Um, Thank you too for me. And there's another question from Shin. And the question is, could you tell us about changing direction a little bit, maybe not. Could you tell us about how a sense of interconnectedness can be fostered through storytelling and reflection?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. It's my work. Uh, if you would be able to imagine this way, we all sit down, and that's my activity that I always do with my student. Imagine this way. You go to a international conference or any conference, right? So the way that the structure usually do is that, hey, you have to sit in the chair, in the line of chair we already have for you, right? You sit there, come to the space, get the knowledge, write out the PowerPoint thing, write out the knowledge from the PowerPoint, and then ask a little quick question, and then, come out. Yeah, that's it. Now, I'm thinking more about the interconnectedness of sharing knowledge in the way that our ancestor, especially from Quê Hương, and then I know that some of the indigenous community also do the same thing. We sit in a circle. We remove the chair, and sometimes the chair that the chair at the conference is already fixed, right? So it is a kind of a metaphor of understanding and seeing that how we are fixed before we actually come in. Does that make sense? So I always try to find a way that people can actually sit in a circle, right? And imagine that, and it's one of the piece of cultures that I am sharing with you. Like in Vietnam and in some Southeast Asian culture, we sit together to, we sit in a circle to share the meals, to talk about, hey, what is going on in the day today? How are you doing? And then we share food, with each other. So this is kind of the way to come to somebody's heart and mind. And I would do the same thing, with when we would be able to sit in a circle, breaking the normalcy of seeing and doing, and would be able to share the knowledge, right? And when you share the knowledge that way, it's not only about what knowledge is shared, but it's also about how knowledge is shared, right? And the way that if you kind of like learn how to create a safe space for people to share the knowledge or to share something that is hidden in their heart, and you would be able to learn so much from them. And that is where the intersectional identity come out between both of you. Imagine that, their own story somehow also reflect and resonate with, your identity and your story, and probably not, but you would be able to meet with each other in between, in terms of like, that is something that I never thought about. And when you have those kind of thinking, that is where the bridge is being built. The interconnected is being built and emerge, if it makes sense. So I think we are a creative human beings who would, as long as we are committed to decolonizing our mindsets, we will find the different creative ways to disrupt the known. That's all I'm saying.
And I think I invite those who've not read your pieces in the academic journals that Ethan has published in. Their work always starts, with a verse, with a dedication, with stories. And it is amazing to read their articles because, it draws you in. It doesn't push you out. They don't, the work doesn't push you out with all the, things you do not know, but it invites you into reading stories, which I find fascinating. So thank you for that. Those of you who've not read it, I think we have a list of readings in our announcement today that you can pursue. And so I'm going back, continue to ask you a question. So Larissa has this another comment. We
Yes.
Sakta Yakut use circles, circle dance and eating in a circle, and storytelling in the evening in a circle. And so there, it just aligns with what you said. In many cultures coming together through stories, through circles, to many circles of life.
Okay, let me tell you one story. I think it's funny, but I don't know if it's funny to you. So I have amazing advisor during my doctoral program, but her name is Dr. Gertrude Dinkersach. And I remember in one of the conference that we went to, I don't remember where, probably in Georgia. We went to the beach, and then me and a couple of doctoral students who are dear friend of mine also say, we are going to have a storytelling, right? And then she actually like brought us to the beach, at night, like around 9 p.m., where there actually beautiful, waves, and then they have like a full moon. And then she said, now let's get there. And then, I had a whole day conference. So I laid out there, and then she started like, oh, what is that? Flounder, flounder, come to the sea. Flounder, flounder, come to the sea. And then I'm falling asleep and the whole time. And then she started to talk about like, oh, the story, this and that and that. And I'm like, okay, that's so cool. But I cannot my body could not resist with, the atmosphere and the space and all of the flower thing. So, but I think that is the way to help me to understand, and she's from Bahamas, right? And then the way that she brings the story into the space, she what is the word? She de-academize it, in a way that put storytelling on a daily basics form of knowing and sharing. So I encourage you, if you have some sort of the way that your cultural storytelling, and then in Vietnam we call kể chuyện. So that would bring you into sharing the space with everyone. So that's pretty much that I'm trying to say.
Thank you. There's another comment here from Leanne, and she's saying, it is great that Vietnam is making progress in accepting the LGBT community. It took Vietnam almost 10 years to change from banning to not acknowledging same-sex marriage. Do you think Vietnam will legalize same-sex marriage soon, as the younger generation is gaining greater awareness and understanding of the LGBT community?
That is my dream. That is my dream, to see that Vietnam will legalize the same-sex marriage. But I think in order for that dream happen, we have so much work to do. We have so much work to do. It's not only like from the scholar, but also, not only from the scholar researcher, but also like from the teachers, from the student, from the parents, from the families, from every different stakeholders who share the same message that, LGBTQ community is just a wonderful community. And how can we embrace their identity? How can we put their representation, their voices to the public and share to the world that, look, we are here, we are queer, right? And we are doing so much more, that we would be able to contribute to the social change, to commit to and advance the diversity and equity and fairness for all of the identities. So I think that's when I come back to the allyship work. I refuse to do the allyship work by myself. Okay. But I invite people in, I invite people to do the work with me. And then I would encourage you to invite people to do the work with you, to commit with the work of allyship, to bring, equity and diversity and fairness for all.
I think along those lines, one of the things you wrote about is the difference between allyship and performative allyship. What is the difference?
So for me, and then you will see that performative allyship is like this. You go to a, what is that called? A gay pride, for example. Everybody say, hey, gay, that's cool, right? And then people give you the flyers. Hey, take this. We have a program to support you with, the loan payment, for example. Just give you an example, right? And then I think that is when the corporate and the capitalist system trying to use the image or take advantage of the image, right? Or the message, just trying to like capitalize it. But I think, so performative allyship, it is just more about like talking the talk, basically. But, with allyship, I think we have to walk the walk. And I think I also share in my piece that allyship is kind of describe allies who do the work to disrupt and challenge the heteronormativity and cisgenderism, to think queer with oneself in a relational system of support, which I call ACTS, ACTS. And I think that is the way to bring people together, right? It is a way to bring people to create a space of togetherness in order to disrupt the fixity of doing and thinking about queerness and allyship.
Yeah, so it's an interesting distinction that you make between those two, allyship and performative allyship. And I think trying to bring a few of the things of your lived experiences together, I think you quoted Hill, Collins, and Bilge in terms of critical praxis as a means, as a point of convergence between your, identities, TESOL, multilingual immigrants, all that work that you're doing in those spaces. And I think critical praxis, as defined by them, is that it's not just applying scholarly knowledge to a social problem, but using scholarly knowledge, and more importantly, daily experiences, everyday experiences, life experiences, to address or to analyze the social problem. How does that convergence? How do you bring that convergence together in your work across those through areas, across identities work, across TESOL work, across your multilingual immigration work?
In order to answer that question, I think we have to enact the critical mindset in every single space, right? You enact your observation, you enact your inquiry. You come to the space, you ask the question, who is missing? What is missing? Whose voice is excluded? Whose voice is dominant? And you can ask the question, what can we do differently? You just kind of ask those kind of questions, and it prompts you to think differently. And I think that is also part of my work as well. For example, when I taught adult ESOL, right? And then you are given a textbook to say, hey, teach this. When you open the textbook, for example, what kind of thing that you notice? And then you think about the question that I posed. Who's missing? What is missing? Whose voice is excluded? Whose voice is dominant? Right? What can we do differently? So when you see, and I think that is also come back to the notion of the intersectionality, right? And queerness. When you see a body is being oppressed for too long because of the historical, social, cultural, and political factors, you've learned how to cultivate the inquiry. You learn how to do something to benefit with this kind of, the population. And when you do the work, I would encourage you to start with yourself in order to kind of like make the connection, build a bridge to understand themselves. And then I think it is more about like, especially with the allyship work, right? You do the work that invite people in instead of pushing people out. And that is kind of like the core values of the allyship work. But it's also kind of when we started asking critical questions, people are getting uncomfortable. And we have to train ourselves. We have to keep practicing how to start the conversation, even if it is uncomfortable, into some sort of like a respectful ways of understanding each other. So answering your question, Faridah, it is just not only, it's just very difficult for some of the people who bring the theory into practice. But what if we actually live with the theory and practice on a daily basis? What if we would be able to bring the critical mindset to decolonize ourselves on a daily practice? What's going to happen? So those are kind of the questions that I would love to leave for the audience and of this space, and if you would be able to carry that with you into your own space to ask those kind of questions.
I think it's fantastic. One of the things you pointed out is what's missing, whose voice is not heard. I mean, as a critical praxis, which is, doable and right in front of you. But often, we fear behind asking those questions. And so this is the space, I think, that you're trying to, forefront, that we have the critical praxis space is the space,
Yes.
to work. And so we've asked many questions. We're getting almost to the end of the hour. Are there questions we did not ask that you want to bring up, that you feel, that we've not touched upon, that burns in you as a speaker,
Yeah. I think I've been speaking almost like an hour. I think I need to rest my body, and I think that is the way to care for your body, and care for your voice. But I'm just curious, Faridah, with, when you share the space with us, with me, how does it make you feel? And is there anything that you would love to share with us? Because you invited me to this space, right? And I want to honor your thinking, your feeling, your perspective in sharing this space with us.
Mhm. Well, thank you for asking that question. Frankly, I've never been asked that as a moderator, but I feel an invitation to join you in the conversation because I don't know where to begin the conversation. And so, I think engaging with you today I sense the invitation. I sense the opening for me to join you in the space and, and to share with you the liminal spaces that I inhabit myself. And so, to celebrate with you the identities, but more so than ever is the invitation that I sense from you to be, to join you in conversation and to join you in community. And so I thank you for sharing all of those things that you've shared today within the hour. I know it's been a long hour, but before you go, is there a verse that you want or a dedication that you want to share with us as we round up this webinar? It
Sure.
was interesting.
I have so many things, but I would love to read a piece of it so that you will love, I mean, to share with you. This is part of the piece, Still You Resist, an auto-historia teoria of a Vietnamese queer teachers to meditate, teach, and love in the qualified state. So I'm going to read an excerpt of that. I therefore write this piece to bear my sexual identities to the service of an academic paper. Why do I have to expose this vulnerability so that people will judge me? Or worse, the search committee will not hire me if they run into this paper. Am I successful in arguing and dismantling whiteness and power in this piece? I have doubts about it. However, I am convinced that I successfully expose myself clearly to the readers that my sexuality is political. My teaching is political. My meditation is political as well. My sexuality invites and challenges whiteness and power. My teaching contributes to decolonizing Esau classroom. My meditation is setting a social justice path for myself and hopefully for other queer people of color at the intersection of roads. Am I successful in finding an exit to come out of the qualified state? Probably not. However, I decided to stay in the state because it is my new home to write, to teach, to meditate. I hope you find the state as your new home too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trinh, Ethan, and thank you everyone for being with us today. We are grateful for your wisdom and for your insight and, for the things that you've left us to think and, for